Shafira, I go by the name of Motiso Dihomu. I'm just going to explain my analogy on how the VRV system works. So depending on the brand, some would call it VRF, some would call it VRV. So VRV means variable refrigerant volume. VRF means variable refrigerant flow. So depending on the brand you're using, you have that different name. So basically, this is fairly a complex system. So you have your condensing unit, there are a number of components in the condensing unit. You have your coil, you have your fins, you have your fan motor, you have your fan motor PC boards, you have your inverter PC board, you have your compressor PC board, which usually is a scroll compressor, and you have the main PC board. Multiple kinds of sensors, your low pressure sensor, your high pressure sensor, multiple components in the condensing unit, which I call it a parent, which is this unit. And there are quite a number of considerations in how you're supposed to locate or put where your system is going to be located, depending on how high your building is, depending on the run. Run means the length of your piping from the condensing unit to the indoor unit, how the air would circulate, if your outdoor unit exceeds the space that the manufacturer wants your unit to be installed, how are you going to help it not to short circuit that air? You have several components in there. You have your four-way valve, you have usually we use pulse wave modulation electric expansion valve. So you basically in the olden days, or they still exist, where you have your thermostatic expansion valve. There are lots of components related to this system. And then you have your communication, where maybe you have your master, which is the main unit that's received the communication from your helper, which is a selection box or heat recovery unit. So then you have a communication from your master. In this regard, I would say the master is this unit, and then this would be a slave. So this unit would be the one who gets information from your helper. And depending on the manufacturer requirements, you are required to use a specific kind of a communication cable. Then you have your piping and you have your ref nets. Ref nets is just help you to have an even or a balanced flow of refrigerant to the BS box, or where you're going to separate or have different BS boxes and multiple requirements on how the unit should the distance from the ref net to where you're going to make your joint or before, depending on different manufacturers. So these arrows would indicate the communication. So basically, that's how I analyze this kind of systems. So you have your condensing unit, you have your, which I call a parent, you have your heat recovery unit, which is the helper, and then you have your indoor units. They're called evaporator. But in this kind of systems, remember you can cool, it's a heat recovery system. You can simultaneously heat and cool. So uh, maybe for instance, in this envelope or in this room, you'll be cooling, and then in the other room, you'll be heating. So the heat lost in the cooling envelope or in the cooling room would be redirected by this heat recovery, which is the helper to the room that needs heating. So basically, it saves energy. We'll deal with the energy part of it and how it saves energy. Right. So in totality, at the end of the month, the parent, which is the condensing unit, would make grocery for his or her kids, which is the indoor unit. So the person responsible to distribute that food that grocery will be your helper at your absence as a parent. So you are at work or wherever you may be. So the helper is responsible to feed these children of yours. So there are different kind of indoor units depending on the application that you might want to apply, or depending on your needs. So basically you will have, suppose this one would be uh, an older kid, and then this one would be a relatively younger kid. So the older kid will eventually consume more food than the younger kid. So when the food is the older kid have eaten, and then the helper will take a certain portion from the relatively smaller kid to feed the older kid. It's only when she or he runs out of the food or the grocery would call. That's where the communication happens. Would call the parents, say, hey, the food that the monthly grocery that we had is diminishing. Can you please give us more? Then you have relatively your scroll compressor being ramped up and runs at the higher speed, and then feeding the helper, and then the helper will distribute depending on the requirements of the children, right? So the other one maybe will be cooling, and then the other one will be heating. So he will take, in the cooling room, you take that heat that has been extracted from that room or in that envelope, and dishes that heat to the other one that needs heating. So basically, you're saving energy. This is how you supposed, I'll make another video on how the energy is being saved. But relatively, you see, the heat is being recovered from one room instead of pumping the whole, uh, pumping the whole refrigerant from the outdoor unit, and more often than not would be far from where the indoor unit would be. Right. So that's a certain portion on how you save energy in this kind of rooms. Remember, you have four-way valves. This condensing unit might be the evaporator, or this evaporator, so-called evaporator, which is our kit, may be the condensing unit. May change that's where the phase changes, the fluid phase changes, because now you have your liquid state, you have your vapor state, and then you have where you have a saturated, a mixture of both. So that's how it operates. But fairly enough, that's the simplistic way in how I analyze or I understand the system. Would go into deeper in how each component works. Remember, in the condensing unit, you also have your oil separator. How does it work? How does it separate oil? Why do we need oil in the first place in that system? We have your accumulator. Why do we need an accumulator in that system? There you have your capillary tube, and it's fairly a complex system on itself. But this is the basic on how it works. A parent, a helper, and kids. Kids communicate to help us, say, hey, we're not well, we're a little bit hungry. And then he will take food from the toddler or the less old children gives to the older children to eat. And then if the older kid is enough, and then who gave it to another kid depending on their needs. And then this arrows just indicate the communication, the communication between the heat recovery unit or BS box, a selector box in how what is known now. I'm out. I go by the name of Motizo. Hit the subscribe button, like that video. Ah! There we go.